There is something quietly powerful about watching two men refuse to panic while everyone else is shouting. In politics, especially in countries where betrayal is routine and ambition burns hot, calm is often mistaken for weakness. But sometimes calm is not confusion. Sometimes it is discipline. Sometimes what looks like political chaos is actually a long game unfolding exactly as planned. That is what many observers are missing right now in Nigeria. For weeks, headlines and social media commentary have tried to convince the public that Peter Obi and Datti Baba-Ahmed are drifting apart, that the declaration of presidential ambition by Datti Baba-Ahmed signals division, that the obedient movement, one of the most grassroots-driven political forces Nigeria has ever seen, is cracking under pressure. Some even celebrated, claiming the opposition had finally self-destructed. But what if that interpretation is completely wrong? What if what we are witnessing is not fragmentation but coordination, not desperation but strategy, not ego but restraint? In a political environment where rivals rush to declare loyalty today and switch sides tomorrow, Peter Obi and Datti Baba-Ahmed are doing something deeply unfamiliar. They are refusing to react emotionally. They are refusing to close doors prematurely. And most importantly, they are refusing to hand their opponents an easy narrative. While the ruling All Progressives Congress scans for predictable moves, press conferences, infighting, rushed alliances, something else is happening beneath the surface. Quiet tests are being set, backup plans are being reinforced, legal structures are being stabilized, and millions of ordinary Nigerians who believe in change are being kept intact, not scattered. This is not politics driven by headlines. It is politics driven by patience. And for viewers watching from the United States, especially those who have lived through decades of elections, broken promises, and carefully staged political theater, the real question becomes unavoidable. Can strategic patience defeat a system built on manipulation? Can an opposition win, not by shouting louder, but by thinking further ahead? Tonight, we are going to walk through what is really happening behind the noise, step by step. We will look at why Peter Obi's moves are unsettling the establishment, why Datti Baba-Ahmed's role is being misunderstood, and why this moment may represent a new way of doing opposition politics in Nigeria. If you believe that political change is built on strategy, not spectacle, please share this video. Subscribe if you believe the truth matters more than propaganda. And leave a comment below. Do you think this kind of discipline can actually change Nigeria's political future? The moment Datti Baba-Ahmed declared his presidential ambition, the Nigerian political environment reacted exactly as it always does, loudly, emotionally, and without patience. Within hours, social media feeds were flooded with hot takes. Television panels rushed to judgment. Commentators who thrive on conflict sharpened their knives. And the most convenient conclusion spread like wildfire: the opposition had finally turned on itself. The accusation was simple and seductive. Datti Baba-Ahmed, many claimed, had abandoned Peter Obi. The obedient movement was allegedly finished. Unity had collapsed. The carefully built trust of 2023 was supposedly gone. For Nigeria's ruling establishment, this was the narrative they had been waiting for. The propaganda machinery of the All Progressives Congress did not hesitate. Political operatives pushed the story aggressively. Opposition betrayal fractured loyalty, wounded egos. The message was designed to do one thing: break morale. And for a brief moment, it worked. Even some supporters of the movement felt the sting of uncertainty. When politics has trained people to expect betrayal, suspicion becomes a reflex. But here is the critical detail that most observers missed. None of this reaction came from facts. It came from assumption. In Nigeria, political ambition has been conditioned to mean war. When one figure declares interest, it is automatically interpreted as an attack on another. Loyalty is assumed to be transactional, temporary, and disposable. So when Datti Baba-Ahmed spoke, the system responded exactly as it was trained to, by projecting its own habits onto him. Yet nothing in his declaration actually contradicted Peter Obi's broader political direction. What followed next is what separates strategy from noise. Instead of rushing into defensive statements or public counterattacks, Peter Obi remained calm. He did not issue emotional rebuttals. He did not distance himself theatrically. He allowed the storm to reveal something important: how quickly opponents and even some supporters confuse movement building with personality worship. Behind the scenes, the picture looked very different from the one painted on television. Peter Obi did not lose control of his base. The obedient movement did not scatter. There were no mass defections, no internal collapse. What happened instead was a test one not of loyalty but of discipline. Could supporters resist panic? Could leadership resist reacting on impulse? Could the movement hold steady while the noise peaked? This moment mattered because it exposed a core weakness in Nigeria's political culture. The system thrives on emotional reactions. It feeds on confusion. It wins when opponents are pushed into premature decisions. That is how parties fracture. That is how coalitions fail before they even form. And that is precisely why the response from Peter Obi and Datti Baba-Ahmed was so unsettling to the establishment. They did not fight the narrative immediately. They let it run. They let critics exhaust themselves, and in doing so they allowed the contrast to emerge naturally. While others were shouting, they were thinking. While opponents were celebrating imaginary victories, something far more important was happening quietly. The opposition was refusing to break formation. For longtime American observers of politics, this moment should feel familiar. It mirrors periods when media frenzy tried to force reactions, when headlines demanded instant answers, and when restraint was mistaken for weakness. History shows that those who survive such moments are not the loudest voices, but the ones who understand timing. This was not the collapse of a movement. It was the exposure of how fragile the old political playbook has become. The ruling class expected chaos, and instead they encountered silence. They expected denial, and instead they met patience. That silence was not empty. It was intentional. And it marked the opening phase of a strategy that would soon make the earlier accusations look not just wrong, but embarrassingly short-sighted. The moment that shattered every assumption came quietly, without drama, without theatrics, and without anger. While critics were still recycling the same accusations, Datti Baba-Ahmed sat in front of a camera and spoke with a calm that cut straight through the noise. No insults, no defensive tone, just clarity. He stated plainly that his personal relationship with Peter Obi was solid. He reminded the public that Peter Obi had recently attended a wedding in his home. He emphasized respect, personal and political. And then he delivered the line that collapsed an entire propaganda campaign in a single breath. If Peter Obi does not secure the presidential ticket of the African Democratic Congress, he would be welcomed back into the Labour Party, and Datti himself would campaign for him. That statement did not merely contradict the narrative, it erased it. Suddenly, the story of betrayal had nowhere to stand. The idea of rivalry evaporated. The suggestion of division lost oxygen. What remained was something far more uncomfortable for the establishment: coordination, intent, mutual respect. In Nigerian politics, this kind of public affirmation is rare. The system is built on quiet resentment and public denial. Leaders often pretend unity while privately undermining one another. What Datti Baba-Ahmed did was the opposite. He brought private alignment into the open, and that transparency became the climax of the entire episode. The reaction was immediate and revealing. The propaganda engine of the All Progressives Congress stalled. Their talking points no longer worked. Their social media operatives were left asking the same question over and over again. Who exactly are we supposed to attack? Was Peter Obi an ally of Datti Baba-Ahmed or his rival? Was he inside ADC or preparing to return to Labour? Was the opposition divided or simply operating on a level of coordination they could not decode? Confusion replaced confidence. This was not accidental. The brilliance of the moment lies in its simplicity. No new alliance was announced, no threats were made, no party lines were crossed publicly. And yet every possible line of attack was neutralized at once. The opposition did not present a target, they removed the map entirely. For seasoned American viewers, this is the kind of political moment that often goes unnoticed at first. It lacks spectacle. There is no shouting, no dramatic walkouts, no viral confrontation. But it is precisely this absence of chaos that signals strategic maturity. This is what it looks like when leaders refuse to play the game exactly as it has been designed. The old playbook depends on emotional reaction. It assumes that accusations will force hurried clarifications, public disagreements, and internal fractures. That did not happen. Instead, the accusation cycle burned itself out. Critics found themselves repeating claims that no longer aligned with reality, and supporters who initially wavered began to recognize something deeper at work. This was the pivot point. What the opposition demonstrated in that moment was not just unity, but control over timing, messaging, and emotional discipline. They allowed the storm to reach its peak before stepping in with a single decisive clarification. And by doing so, they exposed how fragile the old propaganda machinery had become. The ruling party thrives on predictability. They understand how to fight opponents who panic, who rush, who react. What they are not prepared for is an opposition that waits, that listens, that lets false narratives collapse under their own weight. This was not just a response to criticism, it was a lesson in political restraint. And once that lesson was delivered, the conversation shifted. The question was no longer whether the opposition was divided. The question became whether the establishment could still read the board at all. Because from this moment forward, it was clear the game had changed and the old rules were no longer enough. Once the noise faded and the narratives collapsed, the real consequences of this strategy began to surface quietly but unmistakably. What initially appeared to be an internal political drama revealed itself as something far more consequential, a deliberate reshaping of opposition politics and its relationship with ordinary citizens. For supporters of Peter Obi, the immediate effect was psychological stabilization. Panic gave way to clarity. Many ordinary Nigerians, teachers, traders, retirees, young professionals had watched past movements fracture under pressure. This time, the movement did not splinter. It held. That alone changed expectations. People began to understand that this opposition was not built on emotional loyalty to headlines, but on trust developed over time. The civil impact of that realization matters. When citizens believe a political movement can endure stress without collapsing, participation deepens. People stay engaged. They volunteer. They protect votes. They invest time, not just hope. The obedient movement, instead of shrinking quietly, reaffirmed its identity as something larger than one election cycle or one party platform. On the political side, the consequences were even more profound. The Labour Party, long weakened by leadership disputes and legal uncertainty, suddenly found itself with an opening. With Julius Abure no longer dominating the structure, space emerged for reorganization. This was not cosmetic change. It was structural. Leadership credibility, legal recognition, and internal discipline became attainable goals again. Two figures became central to this transformation: Datti Baba-Ahmed and Alex Otti. Their roles were not loud, but they were decisive, stabilizing party organs, preparing for a legitimate convention, rebuilding the legal foundation that had previously allowed opponents to dismiss the party on technical grounds. For the first time since 2023, Labour Party was being positioned not as a protest vehicle, but as a viable governing platform. This restructuring had ripple effects beyond Labour Party itself. It altered the leverage dynamics with the African Democratic Congress. Peter Obi's engagement with ADC no longer looked like a desperate search for shelter. It looked like a measured evaluation. ADC was placed under a clear moral and political test: zoning, fairness, inclusion, while knowing that failure would not cripple Obi's movement. That reality shifted power away from party elites and back toward the electorate. For Nigeria's ruling All Progressives Congress, the consequences were deeply unsettling. Their traditional tools, internal sabotage, legal technicalities, narrative warfare, depend on opposition weakness. This time, weakness did not appear. Instead, the opposition seemed to gain options: multiple paths, legal grounding, popular legitimacy. From a civil perspective, this moment reshaped expectations. Nigerians accustomed to chaotic opposition politics began to see an alternative leadership that values patience over impulse, systems over personalities, and long-term credibility over short-term applause. That shift may be subtle, but it is transformative. For American observers, this echoes a familiar lesson. Democracies do not fail only through repression. They fail when citizens lose faith in organization and discipline. What is happening here suggests the opposite. Faith is being rebuilt not through slogans, but through structure. This stage of the strategy did not deliver fireworks, it delivered foundations. And foundations once laid correctly change everything that comes after. From an American perspective, what is unfolding in Nigeria should feel both familiar and instructive. It is a reminder that democracy does not succeed or fail only on election day. It rises or collapses on organization, legal discipline, and the ability of political movements to outgrow personalities without losing their soul. For viewers in the United States, the temptation is often to view African politics through moments of spectacle: coups, protests, court rulings, dramatic speeches. But the deeper story, the one that shapes outcomes years later, usually happens off camera. What Peter Obi and his allies are attempting now fits that quieter category. It is not flashy. It is procedural. And that is precisely why it matters. Across the democratic world, established parties often survive not because they govern well, but because their opponents are disorganized. They rely on fragmentation, legal confusion, and impatience. The ruling All Progressives Congress has benefited from this dynamic for years. Weak opposition structures, internal lawsuits, and rushed alliances created openings that the system could exploit sometimes without changing a single vote. What looks different now is not rhetoric, but posture. By refusing to rush decisions, by keeping multiple legal and organizational options open, and by maintaining a disciplined grassroots base, the opposition is adopting a model that seasoned American observers will recognize. It mirrors moments in U.S. moments in history when political movements learned, often painfully, that emotional energy alone cannot defeat entrenched systems. Structure matters, courts matter, party rules matter, and patience matters most of all. Internationally, this approach also challenges a long-standing narrative about African opposition politics, that it is reactive, chaotic, and personality-driven. The current strategy disrupts that assumption. It shows an opposition that is testing institutions instead of begging them, evaluating parties instead of clinging to them, and preparing legal ground before demanding political victory. That shift has implications beyond Nigeria. Across emerging democracies, ruling parties watch one another closely. So do opposition movements. When a model of disciplined, legally grounded resistance begins to work, it travels. Not as a slogan, but as a method. What Nigeria is quietly demonstrating is that reform does not always come from overthrowing systems, but from learning how to withstand them long enough to expose their weaknesses. For American viewers who have witnessed decades of political cycles, hope, disappointment, polarization, this moment carries a familiar warning. Systems rarely fall to noise. They fall to strategy. They fall when opponents stop reacting and start preparing. They fall when voters see not just anger, but competence. The global takeaway is simple but uncomfortable for entrenched power. A patient opposition is far more dangerous than a loud one. And that is why this moment matters beyond Nigeria's borders. It is not about ideology. It is about method. It is about whether political change in complex democracies is still possible without burning everything down. What we are watching suggests that it is if leaders are willing to think beyond the next headline and citizens are willing to stay the course. As this chapter closes, one truth stands out with uncomfortable clarity. The most dangerous opponent to an entrenched political system is not a loud one, it is a prepared one. What Peter Obi and Datti Baba-Ahmed have demonstrated is not bravado, not defiance, but something far rarer in modern politics: discipline. The warning here is not directed at voters, it is directed at institutions. When opposition movements learn to slow down, to keep legal options open, and to protect their base from emotional whiplash, old methods stop working. Smear campaigns lose their bite. Internal sabotage loses its timing advantage. Predictability, the oxygen of political manipulation, evaporates. This is why the current moment matters so deeply in Nigeria. The opposition has not chosen a single road. It has secured several. If the African Democratic Congress demonstrates fairness and zones its ticket responsibly, a broader coalition emerges. If it does not, a restructured Labour Party, legally grounded and organizationally stable, stands ready. Either outcome preserves momentum. Either outcome protects millions of supporters from disillusionment. That reality leaves the ruling All Progressives Congress with a shrinking set of options. The tactics that once thrived on confusion now encounter coordination. The strategies that depended on impatience now face restraint. This is not a guarantee of victory, but it is a transformation of the battlefield. For American viewers who have lived through decades of elections, reforms, and reversals, the lesson resonates. Sustainable political change is not born from constant outrage. It is built through structures that endure pressure. It requires leaders willing to resist the temptation of instant gratification and citizens willing to measure progress in years, not news cycles. The broader implication is hopeful but conditional. This path only works if discipline holds, if patience is preserved, if principles remain stronger than convenience. Movements collapse when shortcuts replace structure. They succeed when credibility is protected even under attack. So the final question is not about parties or personalities. It is about choice. Will institutions rise to meet a new standard of accountability or retreat to familiar games? Will citizens reward strategy over spectacle? And will this moment mark the beginning of a mature opposition culture or merely a missed opportunity? If you believe political change is built on preparation, not panic, please share this video. Subscribe if you believe the truth matters more than headlines. And in the comments below, tell us, do you think strategic patience can finally reshape Nigeria's political future?